My friends, if the Ukrainian army wants to have a fighting chance in 2024, they have no other choice but to mobilize a lot of people to fill in all their trenches. Here from Politico, Ukraine is at great risk of its front lines collapsing. Oh wow, big surprise, what could have possibly happened?
We are winning!
As the Russian army is growing by a battalion a day, we're talking about 1,000 new recruits every 24 hours. Ukrainian commanders are now urgently demanding reinforcements.
We have a big problem with manpower. We simply lack men. People have lost the enthusiasm which they had at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We need big reinforcements. Many people here are tired.
Now any male between 25 and 60 years old can be sent right into the Miesarubka, the meat grinder. I mean, look at the faces of Ukraine's latest batch of conscripts. As you can see, they seem extremely motivated to fight. In no time, they will be fighting at the gates of Moscow.
Why don't young people want to be drafted into the army? Because they know the price of holding the front lines.
Meanwhile, this Ukrainian officer, using very beautiful language, explains how he wants the new mobilization law to go through as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be GG, well played. The Ukrainian command is clearly getting worried because, as Reuters reported on the 21st of February, Ukraine outnumbered, outgunned, ground down by relentless Russia. Outnumbered? How could this be? Twitter and Reddit told me that the Russians are losing thousands of soldiers every day. Yet, it's Ukraine that desperately needs soldiers. You might wonder what happened to Ukraine's 1 million man army. Remember what Zelensky said on the 29th of January in an interview with German TV channel ARD.
Але у нас 880 тисяч, у нас мільйонна армія.
I don't understand. 880,000 soldiers, but Ukraine claims it urgently needs 500,000 soldiers. And this is on top of all the soldiers they already conscripted back in 2023. On the 29th of February, Kirill Veres, that I already presented to you in the past, the commander of the K2 battalion of the 54th Mechanized Brigade, he said Ukraine needs mobilization in order not to allow even more territories to be overrun. Well, that sounds like a very optimistic assessment of what could happen to Ukraine this year. Meanwhile, the commander of the elite Da Vinci Wolves battalion says Ukraine immediately needs at least 250,000 Mobics to reach the front line. Same conclusion in the president's office. On the 6th of April, Zelensky says more soldiers, equipment needed to disrupt Russian offensive. Now, there is some positive because in Ukraine, everyone is doing their part. Perhaps they lack artillery shells, but this Ukrainian adult actress is using her heavy howitzers to raise funds for Ukrainian soldiers that lost limbs during the war against Russia. She's so patriotic that she started the sale of an exclusive calendar where she's posing with wounded Ukrainian war veterans. For research purposes only, her name is Josephine Jackson. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped. And welcome to the headquarters. There is no open source information as to how many Ukrainian men have been conscripted into the armed forces of Ukraine as of now. All we know is that the general staff needs 20,000 replacements per month to stay afloat. So if we assume 10,000 to 15,000 men are drafted every month, that would mean 120 to 180,000 Ukrainians were mobilized in 2023. Deputy Commander, how many more men do we need to the front? The Economist talked to the director of the Ternivka mining complex, and he said the army had already conscripted 600 men, nearly a tenth of the total workforce. But clearly it's not enough. Now they need 500,000 more. At the same time, Le Monde interviewed Volodymyr Artyom, the head of the military administration of the Sumy Oblast. He explained that only 8% of those eligible for draft in the capital Kyiv had actually been drafted, whereas the proportion was officially 40% in the Zaporozhye region, and that among those drafted, the least privileged social classes were overrepresented. Corroborated by The Economist, exactly like we saw at the Ternivka mining complex. This comes as this video went viral, where we see the children of Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, partying, doing crazy stuff somewhere in Germany. Obviously, they won't be subject to the draft. Turns out, they're now German citizens. In response, the Russians made this video mocking the disparity between wealthy Ukrainians living the high life, champagne and women, while the others, the poor, are forcefully sent to the front, right into the trenches under enemy fire. For sure, this phenomenon can be seen in Russia as well, but Russia's population is 5 times bigger, so the effects are much smaller in the grand scheme of things. There are currently 113 brigades and 76 battalions deployed along a 650-kilometer front. Theoretically, at full strength, all these formations represent 500,000 men. However, as you can imagine, after 2 years of war, most already existing frontline battalions are not at 100% strength anymore. For example, the 59th Motorized Brigade announced that they only have 60 to 70% of their manpower left. And this is the number they announced officially. But here's the catch: losses are not equally distributed within the same brigade. To this effect, on the 5th of April, Major General Viktor Nikoliuk noted that the biggest shortage in the army is infantry. Put simply, without infantrymen, the entire front line is at risk, since you cannot properly secure and hold the terrain. As a historical example, the 1944 Battle of Normandy crippled the British Army for the rest of the war, as 70% of their losses were concentrated in rifle companies, and Britain could hardly find replacements for the infantry. To this effect, the 43rd Wessex Infantry Division suffered 7,000 casualties between July 10th and the 22nd, once again with infantry companies taking the bulk of losses. Same thing in Ukraine. Here, the Washington Post reported, frontline Ukrainian units report acute shortage of soldiers. Put simply, they need grunts in the trenches. The article says, Alexander, a battalion commander, said the companies in his unit on average are staffed at about 35% of what they should be. Meanwhile, another battalion commander in a mechanized brigade said that instead of 200 soldiers, that his unit currently has fewer than 40 infantry troops. Come on! How do you expect them to achieve anything with such numbers? But it makes sense. After 2 years of war, after the Ukrainian offensives at Kherson and Liman, after the meat grinders of Bakhmut and Avdiivka, Ukrainian infantry strength has been eroded. And because of that, morale has dropped. Good luck to find volunteers to man these trenches now. Even the elite NATO-trained 47th Mechanized Brigade has been badly mauled. Military Land reports, the brigade's command refuses to admit the brigade lost its offensive potential. Instead, command sends mortar crews, snipers, artillery crews, basically all it has available to the front as assault infantry. Soldiers even started a mutiny as they refused to go to the front. On the 5th of April, Kalina, the former commander of Azov in Mariupol, suggested civilians sign up to his elite brigade instead of playing the conscription lottery. In a way, he's right. You never know what you're gonna get once you click on the loot box. Reality is, all the motivated, patriotic volunteers have already joined the military by now. At this point, who wants to join the infantry when they know exactly what awaits them? There's another big problem in the Ukrainian army that nobody dares to talk about. Ghost soldiers. A lot of trained military personnel that could be sent to replenish frontline units are actually hiding in one way or another at the rear. Think of all the border guards Ukraine has stationed on the Russian and Belarusian borders. Think of all the troops garrisoned in Odessa and in all the other cities of the country. What about all the men guarding various ammunition depots, logistics centers, and train stations? From anecdotal stories I heard, as you get closer towards the front, Every village has a checkpoint at every entry or exit point. Thing is, an average of 20 soldiers are on rotation for each one of these checkpoints. Think about it, there are hundreds of settlements like that with multiple checkpoints all around. But there is a darker side to this story. It's that a number of soldiers bribe their way out of frontline duties. But here's one thing I'm wondering. For example, if a brigade is at 25% strength, the logical thing to do would be to regroup units into one battalion at 100%. But instead of doing this, the Ukrainian command will keep every battalion just as it is. Ukraine never disbands battalions, brigades that have been shattered. Perhaps it's because they want to maintain the structure of the brigade, hoping that at some point mobilized personnel will come in to fill in the gaps. But that's why you have to pay attention to battle reports. Let's say the 1st and 2nd battalions are attacking position Cobra. In theory, this could be equal to 1,000 troops, when the real strength of this attack force would be around 250 soldiers. Now the irony is, while combat units are clearly understaffed, Ukraine is also creating a wide array of new brigades. Why? That's when I thought perhaps it's all a scam, to give the impression that everything is fine when it isn't. Especially considering that already existing units are struggling, like the flagship 47th Mechanized Brigade, the one equipped with M2A2 Bradleys. After suffering heavy losses in Robotine and Avdiivka, the brigade just received its 3rd commander in the last 6 months. Perhaps the reason why they create all these new brigades is because of major structural problems within the Ukrainian army. Heavy losses plus the good old rift between Soviet era and NATO military tactics. As for the new units being created, for example, in December 2023, the armed forces of Ukraine formed the 150th, 151st, 152nd, 153rd and 154th Mechanized Brigades, which will most likely be composed of mobilized personnel trained abroad by NATO instructors. Yes, I know, the exact same strategy as last year. Ukraine seems to have very high expectations of the NATO training missions for its conscripts, like these guys being trained by Danish instructors, or these ones by the Norwegian Home Guard. With that being said, here you can see soldiers of the 154th Mechanized Brigade during their training in the Czech Republic. I will never say Czechia, never. We see that the brigade will be equipped with Soviet-era vehicles like this BMP-1 or this captured T-62M. Also pay attention to the average age of the soldiers in this unit. It's not a surprise. French newspaper Le Monde reported the following. Recruiters have also been forced to enlist increasingly older men, bringing the average age of the Ukrainian army to around 43, 10 years older than in March 2022. It's also because of a demographic reason. The generation born in the 10 years before the independence of Ukraine is by far the most numerous in the country. Now Ukraine has another problem. On the 3rd of April, Military Land posted the 153rd Mechanized Brigade becomes an infantry brigade as the shortage of vehicles forces the Ukrainian command to rethink their plans. So currently Ukraine is not only facing a shortage in manpower, but it's clearly failing to fully equip its combat units. No riflemen, no shells, no vehicles. You can wave goodbye at any offensive operations and at the 1991 borders. And we're not done because Ukraine is also expanding the National Guard. And honestly, I don't know why. In the end, that's how the 32nd Regiment was reformed to 17th Brigade, the 16th Battalion to 34th Regiment, and the 11th Battalion of the National Guard upgraded to 35th Regiment. The long-rumored reformation of territorial forces has also started, with the 100th Territorial Defense Brigade turned into the 100th Mechanized Brigade. Now I really hope that they actually get the vehicles that goes with the title Mechanized. Ukraine also created a new regiment of Rangers. Rangers in name only. Apparently the structure will be similar to the one of the ideologically motivated Kraken Regiment. The main perk is that they will be fully autonomous with their own UAV company, artillery and sapper unit, which proves that Ukraine still hasn't figured out inter-brigade cooperation. How many more can be mobilized? In December, Reuters reported Ukraine considers proposal by army to mobilize another 500,000. And we all remember what the media kindly said about the Russians when they were mobilizing. But, of course, this doesn't apply to the Ukrainians. Currently, the Ukrainian parliament is working on a bill to set the rules of this mobilization and to bring all adult males of the country into a database. Here, from the Kyiv Independent, Zelensky signed several laws on mobilization, making younger men eligible for draft. And that's how Ukraine dropped the age of conscription from 27 to 25. This change allows another 400,000 males to enter the lottery. I swear, soon they'll have lottery scratch tickets with your combat position on it. How long will it be until Ukraine sends 18-year-olds na front? If Ukraine had lowered the age of mobilization from 27 to 18, in theory another 1,680,000 adult men could be conscripted. However, at this point, students are still protected by mobilization laws. Although they're starting to crack down on guys doing their second PhD and postdoc. In the end, if students are still protected, only 430,000 could actually be drafted. On the 14th of February, Ukrainskaya Pravda released a very interesting breakdown of who could be mobilized in Ukraine. Before the Russian invasion, there were theoretically 11.1 million men subject to mobilization in Ukraine. If we proceed by elimination process, about 1 million people, or 11% of the total number, are already serving in various structures of the armed forces. Zelensky talks about 880,000, whereas Budanov says 1.1 million. Even the government doesn't know how many soldiers they have. Let me tell you, it looks very promising. After that, the article reported that 26% of all Ukrainian males live in Russian-controlled territory. That's 3 million men. 2.5 million live in the Donbass in Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, plus 500,000 in territories controlled by the Russian army. Now, what about those who fled abroad? In this video, you can see the Ukrainian police arrest 34 young men who wanted to escape to Romania. According to journalists, each one of them paid 10,000 euros for the trip. However, such videos clearly seem to be police PR stunts. But what was the most shocking to me is how Ukrainskaya Pravda reported 1 million Ukrainian males abroad. In November 2023, the BBC reported 600,000. Now it's 1 million. According to the extremely detailed report by texty.org, 812,000 men aged 18 to 64 received temporary protection in EU countries. Now, if you take into account North America, Dubai Oblast, and the rest of the world, we get to 1 million. Oh my god, that's the entire size of the Ukrainian armed forces. But hold on a second, isn't there martial law prohibiting any adult male from leaving the country? Then we cannot wonder how Yevhen Borisov, the former chief of the Odessa Regional Military Recruitment Center, managed to buy a 4 million euro villa in Spain. Meanwhile, this recruitment commissar from Rivne is also enjoying life. Apart from the bribes, one of the other benefits of the job includes having multiple girlfriends. On top of that, 13% of the male population have various disabilities and medical exemptions. And we know that there's a lot of scams regarding this as well. In the end, this means mobilization can only affect 40% of Ukraine's male population, with 4.5 million Ukrainians that could theoretically be called up to the front. For the most part, these were the ones that were too poor to bribe their way out of the draft lottery. What a tragedy, if you ask me. Now, this pool of manpower can be separated into two categories. The first is the workforce, roughly 2.8 million employees, plus 600,000 entrepreneurs and business owners. The second category is parasites, men who are physically in Ukraine, but who do not work anywhere, who do not pay taxes, and who do not serve in the army. These parasites are numbered at 950,000. And Ukrainskaya Pravda hints that mobilization will mainly target them. However, since the state doesn't know anything about them, since they're not in the database, the government can't send them summons. The only way to catch them is with military recruiters roaming around towns and villages.
Many young people no longer leave their homes. There's always a risk.
As a matter of fact, France faced a similar lack of infantry during the Great War. Infantrymen composed 60% of the French army in May 1915, compared to 32% in October 1918. But fresh meat was needed at the front. So the French army mobilized the early call-up classes of the conscription years 1914, 1915, 1916, 1917, 1918, and even 1919. Throughout the war, this added another 1.6 million soldiers. And on average, 70% of these young men incorporated infantry regiments. France also relied on colonial troops from the entire empire, numbered at about 500,000. At the same time, after the heavy losses suffered in 1914 and 1915, frontline soldiers sitting in trenches started to call out the cowardice of the embusqués, or like the Americans say, rear echelon mofos. This included a wide array of individuals, men considered unfit for service, 3 million, essential workers, 900,000, and especially rear echelon enlisted soldiers, like logistics personnel, engineers, shoemakers, postmen, office workers, and so on. 2 million, for a total of almost 6 million men off the front. As you can imagine, this was truly affecting the morale of combat units. So then came the hunt for these rear echelon mofos. The army organized a new round of medical exams lasting 1 minute 30 each. Out of 2.7 million examinations, 955,000 reinforced frontline units, and another 500,000 were sent to auxiliary services. In May 1915, 30% of military personnel were either in artillery or logistics. By October 1918, this number had increased to 60% of all troops. Despite the lethality of being deployed at the front, due to the industrial nature of the war, everyone started accepting the importance attributed to operations at the rear, like ammunition production, transportation, and medical services. Now back to Ukraine. There are so many things the Ukrainian armed forces have to improve, but so little time. I think the first thing they should do is re-examine all the men declared unfit for duty. Now, in order to maximize the recruitment pool, Ukraine also decided that many 200s, aka wounded soldiers, will be re-enlisted, but this time they will be able to choose their new positions, such as drone operators, artillery crew, or truck drivers. Ukraine is also considering recruiting foreigners into the National Guard. Those who fight for Ukraine and their family members will be able to get Ukrainian citizenship. The new bill on mobilization will also target all the Ukrainian men hiding abroad. They can't force European countries to send them back. So from now on, the ones that are abroad can only get a new passport issued if they possess a military registration number. So if your passport is about to expire, GG, well played. Realistically, we can also sadly expect Ukraine to drop the age of conscription to 18 in order to get new blood into the armed forces. On the 20th of February, Ukrainian soldiers that returned from the front organized an open training course for civilians in Kyiv in case the Russians come back. Such events could boost patriotism and bring more volunteers into the army. At last, women could also play their part. Not necessarily like Josephine Jackson, also not as combat units at the front, but simply at the rear where they can replace men in various auxiliary services, like transportation and logistics, for example. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.